Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, commencing at 6:01 p.m. I will be chairing this meeting as Mayor Pro Tem. Mayor Bernie is online and all council members are in attendance. This special meeting is being held to fill the for final interviews for the council vacancy process. We have 3 final candidate interviews, and each interview will have up to 20 minutes. During the business meeting at 7 p.m. tonight, the council will go into executive session to discuss qualifications of the candidates and return to open session for final decision, and the appointed council member will be sworn in and seated at the dais. Our first candidate tonight, welcome back, is Ms. Antoinette Smith. Welcome.
Thank you.
Council members, I will go ahead and start the timer. We have about 20 minutes for this interview. Who has a question for our candidate? Council Member Forsyth.
I will kick us off.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Great to see you again. In recent years, the City of Redmond and our council has really become known as a leader on future-focused, forward-thinking policies. What are some ways in which you hope to add to that, or policy ideas that you might have to help us maintain that reputation?
Yeah, and I do, as a past member of the Human Services Commission and 20-year resident of the City of Redmond, recognize that. And one of the things that, we really appreciate as a family and why we've lived here as long as we have, for me, I think it's a mixture because there's a lot of urgent needs right now, things that need to happen right now. But certainly, one of the things that came up recently was SNAP, so the supplemental nutrition, and it's late in the afternoon or the evening, food access. So SNAP benefits were frozen for a lot of our neighbors. One of the things that came up for me in the work that I do in human services was this idea of, we often think about shelter as a regional approach, meaning as cities we pay for not necessarily individual residents served, but we are paying for space, right? Bed space. And knowing that folks who are unhoused don't necessarily stay within boundaries, right? And so this idea I was thinking about was, how do we approach food access in the same way? Because when food access is limited or non-existent, as it was, how do we provide a way so that we can all collectively on the east side mobilize? I was really proud of all the cities. I think everybody just stood up and did the things that they needed to do, and there was a lot of allocation of funding, right, if things were to be extended. And so I was really proud of that and was thinking about what if there was a way that regionally we could work in a swifter manner and collective, so that there is like a pot of money that we already have set aside, instead of being more reactionary to those needs that come up. So that's one of the things. I'm really proud of the work that we do collectively and collaboratively on the east side.
Thank you. Councilmember Kritzer.
So I'll ask a follow-up question. You can use this as the example or something else. So if you wanted to get a new initiative or a policy passed, that's something that's kind of net new, as something that idea you're bringing forward, what are the steps you think that you would take to make that happen? How would you envision working with your colleagues, the mayor's office, staff, the public, to be able to achieve that? And what do you think is a reasonable timeline for getting something like that done?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, really, initially, those are conversations that you're having with community, right? Because those are the ideas. That's where we get those initiatives. I think a lot of times the work that we do, like food access, right, that was something that came from community. So I can't take credit for that. The folks in our community are providers, community members, leadership. I think that's number one step, having those conversations. And finding out how to best serve those folks. So folks who are most impacted, whatever that group is, usually it's multiple identities, right? It's usually not a singular identity. Having those conversations. So for me, it's community first and foremost, and having those conversations. And then there has to be buy-in, right? So what are those conversations you're having internally? I think working for a city, I know that it can be siloed at times, so I think we all strive to work together to get things going. But yeah, I think having conversations across sectors within the city, also making sure that you have those relationships and community as well. So I think it's starting with those really fundamental conversations first, and I think the rest of it is not easy, but that comes later. Timeline-wise, I think that just depends. As an example, the rapid response funding, I can speak to the city that I work in. That was one of those things where waiting wasn't really an option. So for us, I think, was the most aggressive timeline we had to put out an RFP, take it to city council. So it was utilizing those folks that were within our parks department and knowing when to step back and letting leadership then move that forward and being able to take it to them and saying, this is what we really need to do now. And knowing that they trusted us enough to say, you're right, let's do that. And then we did all the work, right? We had everything on deck, an RFP already written, talking to the community, knowing what was really needed. I think having those things ready as you're doing it. My boss likes to say, building the plane as you're flying it, right? So I think it's doing both and, right? Getting all of those things together at the same time. So, I mean, it could be weeks, it could be months. I think it depends on the severity of what the issue is.
Thank you. Councilmember Procria.
Well, thank you for being here on a Tuesday night. It's wonderful to see you. Council has often been compared to, the board of directors of a company, where oftentimes you have to read a lot of information, and then you come to council meetings or you talk to staff and you ask probing questions to help influence the direction of the city of Redmond. So I was wondering if you could just give me a time where a question that you asked helped influence the direction of a company or an organization or any kind of group that you work with.
Yeah, I think, and I have a lot of these conversations, being fairly new in the human services, I guess, relatively new on the east side. I'm going into my 5th year working in this area. I think, generally speaking, asking the question, well, why not? So, for example, one of the recent initiatives we put into place was, advance payment. So advance payment is not a model that we use very often or has been used historically on the east side working with human services grants. So usually the way that happens is it's in a reimbursement. So most cities work with vendors and vendors do the work and then they're paid for that. In human services, it works a little differently. So that was one of the harder sells, I would say, and the conversation started with, well, why not? Why are we not doing that? What are those barriers keeping us from making that happen? Recognizing that many small nonprofits aren't applying for human services funding because that upfront capital is so challenging to have and to utilize. So, and that's another, I guess, initiative that took a while. That was not an easy initiative to move forward and probably took a better part of a year. But I think it's the persistence. But I think always asking that question, why not? And then when someone says, why not? Then you say, well, what do we do to change that? What are the barriers? What can we do next?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and hop in on a question. We've gotten to hear so much about your work in a neighboring city, inside of a city hall, and this opportunity to serve on the council represents a different role. So I wonder how you think about that and how you think about the opportunity, what are the opportunities to serve in this different role, and what is exciting about that to you?
I think a lot of the work that I do, I think being able to take the opportunity to provide leadership in a different way. I often take a position as supportive, a supportive role, and others would say there's leadership in that as well. So, I mean, I think getting to know my community even better, I think I know a lot about the greater East Side, but Redmond specific, I think that's a great opportunity. And to look beyond just the human services. I know that's the world that I live in. I think ultimately everything, all roads lead back to human services. But I think it would be a great opportunity to learn more about, so what is happening in housing on that back end. I find it fascinating to understand what are those other parts of the systems and the structures that I don't often get to see in my work, right? And to learn. I think that's the big thing. I love to learn, and I want to be really flexible in this role. I would be one of those people who are looking up words all the time, and what does that mean? I kind of had that feeling with the packet that I reviewed. But yeah, I think it's an opportunity to see the behind the scenes, the not so glamorous part of it, getting to know a lot of different people from a lot of different areas within the work that is done here on I guess on a daily basis.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Soni.
Welcome back. We know and we often hear that our city is growing fast. We basically want to know, what's your perspective? How should the city balance growth, affordability, infrastructure, and yet have the quality of life?
Yeah, I think that is one of the challenges. Even in the last 20 years, since I moved here, the city has grown so much, and there really isn't anything we're going to do to stop that. I think sometimes it's a little overwhelming. Certainly having more deeper conversations with our community members, I think we would learn, and I know we hear a lot, but I think that there is a sector that we're really not, that really need to be the focus of those conversations. I often think of when we're supporting the folks who are most impacted, then we're really supporting everyone in the community, right? So when we're providing the housing, the green spaces, and the places that they need more access to, right? Then we're supporting everybody in our community. Yeah, I think it is a bit uncomfortable, and a lot of us are sitting in that discomfort of the growth. It's great for business, it's great for community. We've seen some really beautiful buildings go up, and as many other people have added, it's like, are the folks who are making this city run able to enjoy and live in this beautiful city as well? And I would say probably not. That would be no.
Council Vice President Nueva Camina.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks.
It's great to see you. The question that I had was about times where we've needed to make a difficult decision based on various community needs, and a decision has to be made. What are some of the values that led you to whatever decision you needed to make?
I think often we go to our own personal values in a lot of the work that we do, right? I mean, it's hard not to. I think the thing that I've learned the most, especially from the people that I work with, is how are we able to listen, hear those different perspectives, and be able to put those, to center those voices and those perspectives, right? Even if we don't agree with it. That's the really challenging part, and sometimes, again, that discomfort, how willing are we to feel that discomfort? And I think that is the thing that I've learned and been able to fall back on is, I know I have a feeling about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the right pathway for any issue or disagreement or some challenging issue that's coming up. It's being able to see all those, and I mean, ideally, it falls somewhere in the middle where everybody is getting their needs met. Usually that doesn't happen, but then there'll be another opportunity that will come along. So yeah, I think being able to hear all the sides and consider all of those points of view, I guess, is kind of what I fall back on. Trying not to center myself in those conversations.
Thank you. Councilmember Kritzer.
I think everyone's asked a question, so I was hoping I could do second round. So this is filling a term that goes through 2027. Basically about 2 years of serving on council. So 2 questions for you. One is, what would you feel like success looks like at the end of that 2-year term? And would you envision yourself wanting to optimally pursue a longer amount of time on the council beyond even filling this term?
That's a great question. Success for me, I think, would be learning way more about the community than I know right now. Being able to meet folks where they are and create more relationships, which I love doing. I love creating relationship, and I think that's just foundational to all the work that we do. So I think coming out of this, meeting new people, learning new ideas, learning about things that make me uncomfortable, and being able to reflect back on that, I think, to me, is and not just about me, but just bringing those ideas, I mean, self-reflection, yeah, but being able to incorporate that in all the work that I do. I think that is one of the things that I look forward to, is just learning and growing in everything that I do. And then the second part of that question, what I look to, I don't know. I mean, I think ideally that would be great. I would hope that I would do work that was so meaningful and that people would look to the work that we do as this body and say, that's really amazing. Hey, Annie, you should keep doing that. That's what would probably influence me. Not so much if I'm patting myself on the back. It's that I'm doing the things and I stay true to hopefully centering community in everything that I do. Then I feel like I'd be compelled.
Thank you for sharing. Are there any other questions from the council? Councilmember Soni.
What does ethical leadership means to you sitting in the council?
Can you repeat that one more time?
What does ethical leadership, ethics in your leadership, sitting in the council?
Ethical leadership. I mean, I hope that I move all the time. I'm moving forward in a way that is, like I said, centering our community. I think it's really holding myself accountable and modeling that behavior in all the work that I do. Taking those ideas that I grew up with, that you're honest, you're true to your word, and if you can't be, for whatever reason, that you're honest about it and you say it, and you understand what those limitations are, and you speak plainly, so that everybody is understanding as much as possible. I think that's the hard thing. I think sometimes we speak in a way that isn't inclusive for our community. So I think the ethical part of it is if we say we're going to include everybody, then we need to actively do that, actively include everybody in that conversation, even though it's a lot of work, even though it's really hard, even though it takes a lot of time. I think we need to have the patience and the endurance to do that. So to me, that's the ethical thing to do, is that we're including everybody.
Thank you. We are nearly at time. We have about a minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, this has been a really surreal few weeks. I so appreciate, I want to thank everyone on the council for allowing me the opportunity to be here. I think this has not been something I had ever envisioned myself even attempting, so thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the work that you do. It must be very challenging. I know it's challenging, and so yeah, I'm humbled, and I am grateful for the opportunity, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to share your experience and skills with us. We're really looking forward to continuing on in the conversations tonight and getting to a quick resolution for you, those of you who have been in this process the last few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next candidate is Sina Parsi. Sina, please come on down and join us. And council, we will also have 20 minutes for this interview here. Welcome, Sina. Thanks for joining us. I'll go ahead and start the timer. Is there a council member who'd like to ask the first question? Councilmember Forsyth.
I will kick us off again. So, same question. In recent years, the city of Redmond and our council has really become known as a leader for future-focused and forward-thinking policies. What are some ways in which you would hope to add to or policy ideas you would want to bring forward to help maintain our reputation?
Thank you for the question. So I care deeply about a different range of policies that we have, and some of them that connect with my background. One of them is tech policy and data privacy. I spent many years in tech, and I worked on AI models. I worked on many different facets of technology infrastructure, and privacy is a big one for me. So one area that I would come in, for example, we saw in the past committee of the whole meeting, we saw parking enforcement came forward. I would be looking at putting tech policy and data privacy policies forward so we can have a site of general principles of how we want to collect and capture data and provide data encryption, retention, all of that, and also for technology that the staff uses. So that's one of the areas that I care about and I bring expertise. Another side is environmental policies. I think environmental policies and growth can happen in parallel, and they don't have to necessarily be something that are in contradiction. I look forward to bring forward policies that help save our environment, protect our water streams, water quality. I know PFAS in our groundwater is an issue. So I care to kind of make sure that we have safe water quality for residents. I care to bring forward, I think in my meetings and your office hours, I have mentioned policy issues that I personally deeply care about with housing affordability. And so those are some of the areas that I bring expertise and deep personal care. But all policies that impact our community in terms of culture, in terms of ensuring that we have equity in our community, those are all policies that I personally deeply care about, and I know that are aligned with the values of our city, and I hope to be contributing to all of them.
Thank you so much. Who would like to ask the next question? Council Vice President Nueva Camina.
Thank you. Welcome back. Can you describe a time when you had to make a difficult decision that balanced competing community interests, and what principles guided you, even knowing that some people would disagree?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me tell you an example of a really challenging policy decision that I faced after impact of layoffs on many people that I know and people who were in really tough situations. So an example of it would be people that I know were part of mass layoffs during their parental leave. That really left an aching pain in my heart. I spent months learning about policies of layoff and labor policies and employment policies, parental protections, and one of the really challenging areas that I learned was the conflict between, let me give you an example. For example, if we were to, in a vacuum, push forward policies that protect people during their parental leave, what would be the consequences of that in vacuum? It could be that employers will be less likely to hire people who are in an age that they might be having children. So I worked on bills to help people during critical times as a part of mass layoff with Warren Act, with state representatives. And I had to make really, really challenging decisions in the current policies that we had to balance the priorities of what I recommend to our representatives in terms of how we move forward with our policies. So that's something that, thinking down the line, can I make a decision today that with full positive intent can potentially have the opposite outcome? So making those decisions with full understanding, and I try to do my research as best as I can to make sure that I make the right decisions. So yeah, that was a really challenging decision that I had to understand the consequence of that long term in the general economy of where we are.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Prakriya.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you again. My question is the same as last time, where council has often been compared to the board of directors of the city, where you have to digest a lot of information and then go and try and ask questions that can help set the vision and agenda for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So I was wondering if you just tell me about an example where a question you asked or a point you raised tried to or helped influence the direction of any kind of organization or group that you were a part of.
Yeah, so asking the right questions is really important, because with the wrong questions, we can potentially lead staff towards kind of wasting time or giving them misdirection. So it's really, really important to be able to focus the questions and ask the right questions. And that's something that I have thought quite a bit about. And in terms of kind of how I choose the right decision, I care about what outcomes we want to drive ultimately down the line. And I think about, in terms of where we want to be, is the decision that we're making getting us closer? Are the values that we are, is our decision getting us, is it in line with the values that we are driving? So those are some of the initial things that I think about, but kind of looking broader at what questions I kind of consider is, down the line, who will be living with the consequences of the decisions that we make today? That's a critical one for me. Another one is, who are going to be groups that will be more significantly harmed potentially by a decision. So those are some of the areas that I think about, but generally in terms of how do I make questions, I try to make sure that the staff is focused. We're going towards the goals that we want to be, for example, Redmond 2050, making sure that we're aligned towards that vision, and the questions that I ask are kind of getting us closer to that direction.
Thank you. Councilmember Kritzer?
Thank you. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what the difference is between management and governance. And what is an example of any experience you've had in governance, since that's in this role, that you think would prepare you best for being on the council?
What would be, sorry, let me clarifying that question.
It's a two-part question, I guess. So what do you think is the difference between management and governance? And can you share with us a little bit about any governance experience you've had that you think would prepare you best for being on the council?
Thank you for the question. Let me think about this for a little bit. So the differences between management and governance. So management, I think about it in context of oftentimes a business, or I think about it in terms of driving outcomes, in terms of managing potentially, actually, I might need to think a little bit more about the differences between management and governance. So So let me take the second part of your question first. The second part of your question is what is my experience with governance, and how do I bring that to the council? So I got to learn quite a bit from serving on the Parks Council, Parks Commission, and I think many areas that I learned about was aligning a group on a decision. And that was a very different experience from, actually, that's part of that connects to management. So management, I think, yeah, I think the example helped me. So management, you can make a decision as a person, as an individual, and you can kind of announce that decision and move forward with it. In terms of governance, governance is inclusive. Governance doesn't look at an individual. Governance is collaborating with the governing body that is making a decision with you. Governance is looking at the decision not in a vacuum. We're in a city. The city is surrounded by other cities, by the county. Sometimes that can be very different from management. Governance is setting an example for long-term precedents. So looking at, management, you can make a decision one time and there's no, you can leave the company, you can change positions. There's not really that long-term precedence that matters with it. The other sides of it is that with governance, there is the voice of the community that is very strong and critical in that maybe is not as critical in management directly. So listening to the community, making sure that everyone is heard, especially underrepresented groups that we might not always hear about, so reaching out proactively would be critical areas. Yeah, that's a really good question. Sorry, I took a little bit more time, but yeah, I think serving on the Parks Department really helped me with that, as I did a lot of collecting signatures with reaching out to the people to see what they needed for from their parks, and reaching out to different groups like parents, like elderly, and folks who needed a place to come together with the community. So, and then making those decisions collectively with the Parks Commission as a whole rather than one individual. So those are all experiences that helped me with governance.
Thank you, and apologies, I didn't mean it to be a gotcha question.
That was great, thank you.
All right, we will move on to Councilmember Soni has the next question.
So I have my same question. Depending upon the growth of the city, how should city balance growth, affordability, infrastructure, and yet maintain the quality of life for our communities?
Thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it's really, really important to me that these are not seen as contradictory and they can be totally happening in parallel. An example of that could be with housing and environment. A lot of people who immediately think of, hey, if you are planning to increase housing, that means that you're cutting tree canopy. Versus if we can increase density and current housing, that can protect a lot of that canopy. A different example of that so for example, if you're having more density in a smaller space, if you're building up, or if you're having kind of condos, smaller spaces, that can protect the canopy. Another example of that, how they can play well together, is with providing infrastructure closer to where job opportunities are and where housing is. For example, with our light rail station, we're looking at identifying what are opportunities that we can provide both jobs and provide more housing near light rail. So we can have 15-minute cities where people can have walking distance options to both parks, to their job, and to transit opportunities. So I really see all of these as parallel work streams that can very well happen together, and it just requires careful planning because decisions have cascading effects. If we choose a potentially non-ideal spot for transit, that means that we'll have to make cascading decisions afterwards that will follow, and just goes to why I would like to do this. And that's because I feel like I really care to make those decisions with a lot of thought.
Thank you. I think I'm the last one left on this round, so I wanted to ask, one of our primary roles here on the council is to serve as fiduciaries for the city. We set the budget every couple of years, and then monitor the performance of that. This year is a budget year, so as you think about the opportunity and as you understand it from your prior work in other city spaces, what are some of the key questions that you are bringing to the budget conversation this year if you're selected?
Yeah, key questions for the budget. Let me think about this for a second. So when we think about budget, we are looking at our budget planning and priorities. So one of the key areas that I would be thinking about is, are we in line with our budget plans for the short term and long term, and are we spending the right? Are we having the right impact with the budget that we're spending? So that's one of the areas that I would be thinking about. I come from an experience with both small businesses and large corporations. I worked at both very small businesses and companies like Microsoft and Oracle. So I am very experienced with taking care with making sure that our dollar goes a long way. So that's a really important item for me, to make sure that we're spending carefully and that we're delivering the impact that we need with our budget. The other things I would think about is how we're spending our money in the short term versus long term. We have do we want to focus on short-term investment versus long-term investments? So having a healthy balance for those to make sure that we're not sacrificing long-term payoff for short-term gains would be a critical one for me as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Soni, we're on to round 2 if anyone has any additional questions.
What perspectives or experiences do you bring that we are currently missing from the council?
Oh, that's a tough one. I can tell you what I bring, and then you can kind of decide if that's a missing one or not. I bring technical maturity. I think, Councilmember Procria, I know that you were in tech, but I bring many more years of experience in tech and in serving and seeing the long-term impact of say, privacy decisions that we make in that. So that would be one of the strong areas that I will bring with tech policy background. Another area that I will bring forward is the connection to many communities. I have been serving as a part of many, many nonprofits, hosting hundreds of events, connecting with so many different. I have taken our Afghan refugees to immigration court. I have personally multiple times gone through the immigration process, and I know the personal challenges and pains of the very many immigrant communities that are going through a really tough time right now. I have worked with small businesses, having seen the RFP process from the perspective of small businesses, for example. So I can make sure that our business decisions are fair, and we are setting good policies for making Redmond a safe place for small businesses, and making sure that we're diversifying the businesses that employ Redmond residents and more. So those are some of the things that I can think of off the top of my head, but lots of environmental background that I also bring. Let's see. I also bring, okay, this is gonna be an interesting one, but I also, being so connected to immigrant communities, I have had the opportunity to be very familiar with federal policies. And one of the things that I did, for example, in the month of May, far before we had issues with flock cameras and more, I reached out to our Redmond police and I asked them about our policies with how we're handling data and how we're setting our policies with working with our immigrant communities and also federal employees. And I think I bring that foresight and understanding that could be helpful in terms of just having that deep understanding of our immigrant communities and their needs and challenges. Yeah, I will, if anything else comes to mind, I will share it with you.
Well, thank you so much. We do have a little less than a minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before you go?
I am very grateful and honored to be here. I'm very happy that you all ask such wonderful questions. I honestly am humbled by the quality of the questions that you asked today, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you put into the process. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and with that, we've come to our third candidate. Welcome back, CK. I have asked CK to say his name on the record for us because we actually didn't get that taken care of last time. So welcome back, CK. If you could introduce yourself really quickly, and then we'll go to the first question.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me back. And for the record, my official name is Kochukoshi Cheruvatolo. I go by CK for very practical reasons.
Okay, thank you so much. Who would like to ask the first question? Councilmember Forsyth.
Wrap us up with my question first. Again, same question. In recent years, the city of Redmond and our council has really become known as a leader in our community and future-focused and forward-thinking policies. What are some ways in which you would add to that and policies that you would hope to bring forward to add to our bolstering our reputation?
Absolutely. So I think, I love all things technology, but one thing I think I censor myself. Technology is actually a tool that you should use. It's not the end goal. And very often when we're so enamored by technology, it becomes the end goal in itself. So right throughout my career, I've always thought about how can you use technology to enable access. And one of the things I think we could do very practically for Redmond is, first of all, I've gone to the Redmond City Council, the Redmond City website, very well done. It's amazing that you've got all the different languages. You can quickly translate that site into lots of languages. But one thing I'd love to see, especially with AI now enabled, is making not just the language, but that technical jargon more accessible. And just as a test, I went back home and coded up something, because that's what I do on weekends. And you could technically ask, with the existing zoning codes, for example, can I, what are the rules for what's the offset if I live in this neighborhood? And it can actually look it up and do that. And you can ask that in Hindi, for example, right? So I'd love to see that kind of technology being used, not just, we have this amazing stuff that we could do, but using technology to make it accessible to, some 40% of our population is one in a different country. And I think that'll bridge both the language gap and also kind of that fear of all the technical jargon if they want to build a new ADU or, do some improvements on their property. What can they ask that question in a way that makes sense to them and get an answer, which is maybe technically correct? Of course, there will need to be a human in the loop to kind of make sure that's the right answer, but at least that access is very easy to do these days.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Nueva Camina, Council Vice President.
Thank you. Your background shows a very impressive, strong financial and business expertise. In public service, technical skills are most definitely necessary, and they're not sufficient. Can you tell us about a time when your success depended less on your expertise and more on your listening, shared leadership, or changing your approach based on community input?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think early in my career, I was very data focused. Give me an Excel spreadsheet, I'm at home, right? That's where I used to live. And as I worked more and more, especially in low resource settings, I found that data-driven piece is very important. It forms the backbone, but that is not what people connect to. And I can talk about a project where I worked in India where I couldn't understand why they would not get that data to me in the format that I wanted. And I assumed, and then we got legal involved and a whole bunch of processes. And then actually went out there and saw what that NGO was. They were, in the back of an apartment someplace. Their finance department, which in my brain was, these bunch of people sitting on laptops, was actually two people sharing a computer which worked on and off there. So, and so that really changed my approach, kind of seeing what the conditions really were. And I moved more from understanding what their problems really were, concentrating less on that Excel sheet, even though they did have to send me the data at the end, but concentrating more on what were their real problems and why were they having that trouble delivering it in the way that I wanted. And that really kind of changed my approach. And that was one example early in my career as I moved and worked with much more marginalized communities. I realized that that data is important, but that's not what people connect to. So I moved a lot more into storytelling, understanding, empathy, but you need the data at the back end. But start with that, not start with data.
Thank you. Councilmember Prakriya.
Yes, thank you for being here. It's great to see you again. One other analogy about council is that it's like a forced marriage, forced to work with my colleagues. Well, I like my colleagues, but you are forced to work with them. So I was wondering if you could name a time where you worked constructively with folks with whom you just ended up disagreeing.
Well, I'll have to speak carefully because some of those people this is on YouTube, so people might watch it, so I won't take any names. But yes, I think right throughout my career, I worked with people from different backgrounds, different political leanings, different countries, different cultures. And one example was really when I was working, this was a project in Nigeria. They had a very different take on how and where AI should be implemented. And then when they did implement it, they did not like the answers that the machine was giving them because the AI was trained on, shall we say, very US-focused data. And so I had to really spend a lot of time working with them both to kind of explain to them why the technology works the way it does, but also acknowledge where they came from culturally, their background, their religion, all of that. So I think my experience with this has been you can't stay on your side. You have to reach across and make that bridge with the people you're dealing with. And technology is one way to do that. It helped a lot, but it's not the only way. So that was potentially a.
I'm going to follow up with a very brief question before going to Councilmember Soni. I had a similar question to my colleague. We've heard about your many experiences working with various groups. How do people who work with you describe you?
I think they describe me as easy to work with. I mean, I've gone through many 360 feedbacks, so the most common thing is easy to work with, likable, can be stubborn in some areas, especially when data is involved. But generally, I think the people have described me as likable, easy to work with, and collaborative, always.
Thank you. And Councilmember Soni, I believe you have the next question.
At City, we will always have different opinions. And how would you respond if public opinion strongly favored a position you believed that was not in City's long-term interest, or it could be vice versa?
So it's a great question, and I've had to do that. I've had some experience with that, and again, I won't go into the details. But there was at my previous role, I was being asked. I was asked to approve a certain funding for a certain project, and I fundamentally disagreed with that, and the data did not support that point of view, right? And I had quite a bit of pressure put on me. This is not by the public, but further up the hierarchy saying, all I had to do was click approve, done, problem would go away, right? I was like, no, I'm going to stick to my guns on this, and that's where that stubbornness piece comes in. I'm going to stick to my guns on this, and I made a very good case, and this was, up the management chain, and there was, quite a bit, and it was a stressful time because I was like, it would be so easy just to hit approve, and problem goes away. I stuck to my guns. I made a good story to justify my position, and at the end of the day, I think I prevailed, even though it might have affected my career in some ways. But I'm not afraid of that because, there's a Tennyson quote, my strength is the strength of 10 because my heart is pure. So I'm like, nope, I know I'm right on this. The data supports me. I'm willing to take a stand on that. So I think to answer your question, Councilmember Soni, I would do the same thing. I would have to kind of convince myself that I had taken the right stand, and then I would stick to it, and very politely and very pleasantly stick to my position. And I've done that in the past several times.
Thank you. And great question, Councilmember Soni. Councilmember Kritzer.
Thank you. I think you mentioned in our first interview that you've lived in Redmond for a decade or more. And, a lot of the work that we do on city council deals with a lot of the kind of bread and butter of city things like roads and parks and, all kinds of things. I'm curious to hear, especially the things that improve quality of life for our residents on a day-to-day basis. What's something that you think we should be working on that would help to improve quality of life that falls in this category, or things that you've seen in recent years that you think have been great improvements?
So I love when I was here last, I love the kind of urban nature mix. And when my wife and I moved here, the kind of one of our criteria was want to go to a place where we can go hiking and then walk someplace for coffee, use the car as little as possible or bike to coffee. And that, especially the kind of what's happening in downtown with the coffee shops, the bars, the restaurants, that has been amazing for me, just very selfishly, because as I mentioned, I can go walk the dog and then walk down and have a cup of coffee. So, and I'd love to see more of that, having that small business. And and not just Starbucks, but lots of local coffee shops. So I'd love to see more of those small businesses in the downtown area so that people can walk there. I've seen lots of Lime bikes around, and then lots of people riding their bikes as well. So that connectivity between the bike trail, you can be out on the Sammamish River Trail, bike in, stop by for a coffee at Victor's, and continue on your way. We really love that, and I've really seen a lot of that, and I think the residents really like that too, and I'd love to see more of that. I mean, I've been struggling to find another good coffee shop, so we need some more of those.
Thank you. Councilmember Soni for round 2.
I asked one question to the previous candidate, but I'm changing that question. Why should the council choose you over other candidates? What will differentiate you?
Well, first, let me say I'm very impressed with both the other candidates. So they're amazing, and then whoever you pick, I think will be a great asset to the council there. I think so. I think I'm I'm an intersectional candidate, and I'll tell you why in a couple of different ways, right? And I think you had asked the question, what could I add? One of you had asked, what could I add to this council? Intersectional in a couple of ways. One, my age. Without revealing my real age, I will say I fall into the category called an Xennial. So I'm between a millennial and Gen X. And the way this generation is described is, analog heart, digital brain. So I can do both. I grew up without a cell phone or internet access, but I'm very comfortable with all things technology. The second one is kind of bridging that gap between I was born and raised in India, I spent 22 years in India, and about an equal amount of time in the US there. I have a US passport, I have an overseas citizenship of India, I go back and forth, I kind of have that kind of immigrant experience, but now I'm very much an American for all practical purposes, and I like it here, but I know where I come from, and I can kind of bring that perspective, especially given where our population, about 44%, I believe, was born in another country. And then finally, I have worked at the intersection of the public and the private sector. So I've worked at the Gates Foundation, I worked at the World Bank, I worked in consulting, and I've worked largely with governments all over the world. And I see the benefits of both. You can't just have one or the other. There's a balancing act between the private sector and the public sector. And I think Redmond is right at that crux of that, where those two forces come to meet there with the huge, tech sector that we have all around us, the contracts that we put out, and then the policy decisions that the council makes from a government perspective. So I think all of those would make me a good candidate for this position.
Thank you. Other council members for round 2? Councilmember Kritzer?
Thank you. In your first interview, you mentioned a little bit about housing and about missing middle. I was curious, we were talking earlier today in our committee meeting about our housing goals, and in particular, how we really need to be able to zone in on creating housing that's 50% and below, and especially 30% AMI and below. I'm curious to get your perspective on our recent efforts around permanent supportive housing, as well as kind of the other types of pieces in our plans and what you would see as important to be able to ensure that people of all incomes can live in Redmond.
Absolutely. So one of the kind of the rules I go to kind of in my head is there's something called Goodhart's Law, and I don't know if you've come across that. It's just a framework to think about things, and that is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And examples, I'll come back to housing in a minute, but examples are, they used to measure call centers on how quickly they could close the call. So the effect of that was that people would not take the difficult calls or try to close out that call as soon as possible so that their metrics would look good. So I think with housing, it's depending on how we measure it, that could be the same issue there. And housing, I think the City Council and Redmond should be clear about the aspects of housing that we have control over and what we don't have control over. What we don't have control over is interest rates, which determine ownership. We don't have control over the market, the economy, whether the tech sector is booming or in bust, people are moving in, moving out. Those we don't have control over. What the council does have control over is policy and zoning. And both of those can be very powerful levers if used appropriately when you take into account all of these other measures there. So I don't think the measure can be, you can't have a single measure saying, we need housing to go from, X to X plus N there. But we need to look at all these other factors and figure out how it's, almost like an equalizer on an old-fashioned thing. You got to move these things in different ways so you get the best. You can't push everything up to 11 and, sorry, Spinal Tap reference, but you can't push everything up to 11 and hope it's not going to work out there. So specifically on housing, I think it's not affordable right now. Redmond is not affordable, and not everybody can afford to buy. But I think ownership should be an ultimate goal. I'm a big believer in ownership. I think that really builds community. I know I was a renter in Redmond. When we first moved to Redmond, we rented. And, I really didn't know any of my neighbors. In the apartment next door, somebody would come and go. And, when we moved into ownership, that really built the community. So I know that's a long-term goal, but ownership should be the ultimate goal. But to get there, there will be a cohort of renters, especially given the Redmond economy there. And for those renters, I think, on the zoning side, not just having some of those box-like apartments which are there, but having those community areas. I see the Redmond Town Center, the city park there. It's so great because there are lots of rental apartments around there, but I see, grandparents, multiple generations using that park there. So when building this, and we also want to build community, having those spaces where people can congregate, can meet, and build that community is really important. I know there's a lever there, which is how do we also make that affordable? But I don't think those two have to be in opposition. There's a lot of park area in Redmond, and kind of building those connections between the rental apartments and those parks, encouraging people to go to those park areas, having some form of entertainment in the park apart from just the playground facilities, I think would go a long way.
Thank you so much. We have about 2 minutes left, and we are approaching 7 o'clock. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the council?
I think I'd just love to kind of hear from you what each of you are looking for in a colleague, and especially one which is, I know this is a special position. It's not an elected position. It's a 2-year engagement is what I understand. So what would, and any of you, you don't have to go in any particular order, but what are you looking for in a colleague for this, rather interim period, if you will?
Yeah, since we are pressed for time, we may not have time for individual responses, but I'll say in the questions that you heard from colleagues tonight, looking for a great colleague to work with, looking for a colleague who's thinking about the policy interests of our community, And if anybody else has a one or two word answer they feel really passionate about chiming in with, Councilmember Forsyth?
Openness, curiosity, and willingness to learn.
All right, thank you so much for chiming in. And thank you so much. We look forward to the rest of the deliberations tonight, and we will be adjourning this meeting now and moving into our business meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
We are adjourned.